The lamp had already burned low, and I was sitting on the edge of the bed counting the hours until morning, because morning was his birthday, and I still did not understand what he had asked me for. He had said it quietly at supper, not as a question, more as a statement of something owed. A gift. That was the word he used. And the strange thing, the thing I have never been able to explain to anyone in the years since, is that he did not invent the request. He had been told he was allowed to make it, by whom I would not fully understand until much later. I only knew that night, listening to the rain on the roof and the horses moving in the barn below, that I was about to give something I had never agreed to give, and that everyone in my world would have called it right. Before I tell you what he demanded, let me tell you who I am. My name is Martha. I grew up Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, and this is Hannah, the Amish girl, the channel where I finally say the things my community spent my whole life teaching me to swallow. If you want to understand Amish marriage the way it actually is, not the postcard version with the buggy and the quilts, but the truth from someone who lived inside it, subscribe and tap that like button. And tell me in the comments before you hear the rest. What do you think a husband is allowed to demand from his wife? I want to know what you imagine, because the answer surprised even me. I was 19 when I married Amos. In my community, that was ordinary. School ends at 8th grade, and after that a girl's education is the kitchen and the garden and the nursery. By 16 you are at the Sunday singings. By 18 the older women are already watching to see which boy gives you a ride home. Amos gave me 3 rides before he ever spoke a full sentence to me, and within 5 months our marriage was announced in church. That is how fast it moves. The Ordnung, our unwritten code that governs every hour of every day, is built for speed, because idle time is where the world creeps in. What nobody outside understands is that an Amish wife is not taught what marriage requires of her. She is taught that it requires everything. The sermons on our wedding day were about submission, about the wife yielding as the church yields, about the husband as the head. I sat on that hard bench for nearly 4 hours, and I understood that I was agreeing to obey a man I had spoken to perhaps a dozen times. I did not understand the shape of what obedience would actually mean. No one tells you the shape. You are simply expected to discover it alone after the door closes. The first months were quiet and not unkind. Amos was a serious man, careful with money, gentle enough with the animals. But there was a coldness in how he understood our marriage, a sense that I was a thing that had been transferred to him, the way the deed to the lower field had been transferred, properly and permanently. And the closer his birthday came that first autumn, the more I felt it. Among the men in our district there was a saying, passed between them the way the women passed their own quiet knowledge. A man chooses his birthday gift. I had heard it as a joke at weddings. I did not know it was a rule until it was being applied to me. What he asked for, I will come back to. But I need you to understand the theology that made it possible, because without that, it sounds like one cruel man. And it was so much larger than one man. The first pillar is ownership, disguised as union. When 2 become 1 in our teaching, the one they become is him. Her wants fold into his. Her body, her hours, her voice, all of it is now part of a household he heads. To refuse him anything is not personal refusal. It is rebellion against the order God set down. The second pillar is that a wife's discomfort is not a reason. I was raised to believe that whatever I felt that pushed against duty was the flesh, the proud self, the part of me that needed breaking, hoshmut, pride, the worst sin we had. So when something in me recoiled, I was taught the recoil itself was the sin, not the thing being asked. The third pillar is silence. You do not discuss these matters. Not with your mother, not with your sisters, not with the bishop's wife. The silence is called modesty, but I have come to understand the silence was never about modesty. The silence was about keeping every woman from learning that the others felt it too. There is a part of this story I cannot tell you here. Not on this platform. Not under these rules. The algorithm has limits, and I have learned exactly where they are. So I wrote the rest down instead, slowly, without the softening, without the cuts. Everything the camera is not permitted to show. The book is called The Ordnung They Never Wrote Down. 208 pages of what plain life looks like from the inside of it. The link is in the first comment of this video. That is where the part I could not say out loud lives. Now let me tell you what he demanded, because it is not what most of you are picturing, and the truth is heavier than the picture. He demanded a year. He stood at the foot of the bed on the eve of his birthday, and he told me his gift was a child by the next harvest, and that he expected me to stop the small private things I did to make that not yet happen. He knew about the herbs my grandmother had quietly taught me, the tansy, the cotton root, the careful counting of days. The knowledge women in my line had passed down in whispers for generations, the only thing we owned that the men did not. And he was telling me to surrender it, as a gift, for his birthday. He had gone to the older married men, the way young husbands did, and they had told him this was his to ask, that a wife who withheld children was withholding herself, and that on his birthday he was entitled to claim what the marriage owed him. I was 19. I had been married 6 months, and I lay awake that whole night with the rain coming down, understanding for the first time that the small jar of dried tansy in the back of my cupboard was not really mine, that nothing I thought was mine, that even the inside of my own body had a deed, and the deed was in his name. I want to be honest about Amos, because honesty is the only thing I have left from that life that is worth keeping. He did not think he was cruel. He believed he was claiming something owed, the way you claim a debt you are entitled to, with no malice at all, which is somehow worse than malice. He had been handed this idea by every married man he respected. He had never once heard a voice suggest the idea was wrong. When a man has never been given the question, you cannot be angry at him for not finding the answer. I learned that in therapy years later. It did not make it hurt less, it only made it sadder. My friend Rebecca understood. She was 4 years older, married at 18 to a man twice as hard as mine, and she found me in the wash house one morning that winter when my face must have told her everything. She did not ask what was wrong. She already knew. She had given her own herbs up at 19, too. The same demand, the same birthday, almost word for word, as though the men were all reading from a script none of us were allowed to see. She told me she had 5 children before she was 26, and that she loved every one of them and grieved every one of the choices she never got to make. Both at once, the way you can hold 2 true things in 2 hands. She told me the grief does not cancel the love. It just lives beside it forever. That was the moment something began to turn in me. Not rebellion, not yet. Just a small question I could not put back to sleep. If this was God's order, why did it always run in one direction? Why was it always the woman who gave up the jar? Why was there a saying for what the husband could demand, and no saying at all, anywhere, in any corner of our life, for what the wife was allowed to keep? I gave him the jar. I want you to know that because I am not telling you a story where I was brave that night. I emptied the dried tansy into the stove and I watched it catch, and I felt the last private thing I owned go up the chimney. He was pleased. He thought I was being a good wife. By the next autumn I was a mother, and I loved that child with everything in me. And that love and that loss have lived beside each other in me every single day since, exactly the way Rebecca said they would. I stayed 11 more years. I had 4 children. There were good days. I do not want to lie and tell you it was all darkness, because it was not. And the women who say their whole plain life was a prison are flattening something that had real warmth in it. There were frolics and shared canning, and the deep textured belonging of a community that shows up for every birth and every burial. Amos softened with age. He held the children gently. On his later birthdays he asked for nothing at all, and I have wondered since whether he ever understood what that first one cost me, or whether it simply never crossed his mind that it had cost anything, because the deed was always in his name, and you do not thank a field for yielding. I left when I was 31. The cost came immediately, the way it always does, the shunning. The letters returned unopened, my mother's voice on a borrowed telephone, going silent and then gone. My children torn between the only world they knew and the woman who bore them. I will not pretend that was a clean freedom. It was the most expensive thing I have ever bought, and I am still paying for it. In therapy, I learned words I had never been permitted to hold: coercion, autonomy. The idea that consent is not consent if refusing it costs you your family, your God, and your place in the only world you have ever known. My therapist said something to me once that I have never been able to set down. She said, control rarely looks like a fist. More often it looks like a tradition so old and so gentle in its voice that everyone has forgotten it was ever a choice at all. A saying passed between men at a wedding, a gift expected on a birthday, a jar you are told kindly to empty into the fire. The Amish world gave me real things I carry still. A faith I have wounded and rebuilt into something that is finally mine. Hands that can work through any hard year. A understanding of community so deep most people will never feel its like. But there is no scripture that makes a woman's body a birthday gift. There is no order from God that puts the deed to her own life in another person's name. There is no holiness in a silence that exists only so that no woman ever learns the others felt it too. If you grew up in a place where everything you were was considered owed to someone else, I see you. If you were ever told that the part of you that pushed back was the sinful part, the proud part, the part that needed breaking, I am telling you now that it was not. That was the part of you that was still alive. If you want to read the version of this story that YouTube will not allow, the full pages are in the Ordnung they never wrote down. First comment of this video. And that is everything. Choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.